It started with a note. A simple, clipped piece of paper stuck under my windshield wiper, folded into a sharp rectangle, its corners creased with the same precision that would have made a military commander proud. It wasn't the first time I'd gotten one of these warnings, but it was the first time I realized it wasn't just a petty nuisance. It was a declaration of war. I stood there, in the quiet of the early morning, my boots planted on the dewy grass of my front yard, staring at my tractor, the same tractor that I had used for months to tend the small plot of land behind my house. The same tractor that, according to Karen Ellison, my HOA president, violated at least 3 of her arbitrary, ever-changing rules. Karen, who'd become the HOA's self-proclaimed iron fist, had been giving me grief for weeks. She seemed to think the small community we lived in was her kingdom, and every house, every lawn, every fence was her personal property to manage. Unfolded the note, reading her latest complaint. Your tractor is too loud. Your yard is too untidy. I'll be issuing a fine for noncompliance. You have 48 hours to rectify this situation, or further penalties will apply. The note was signed in perfect block letters, Karen Ellison, HOA President. I knew what was coming. Karen had been on this rampage for months, nitpicking every little thing in our peaceful community to increase her power. I didn't understand how anyone could let her do this, but she'd wormed her way into a position of authority, and no one dared stand up to her. Not until now. Not until me. She'd started small. A warning here and there for an overgrown bush, a flagpole that wasn't the proper size according to her guidelines, a shed that was unsightly because it didn't match the specific shade of beige she deemed appropriate. I'd ignored her at first. I thought it was a bad joke. But when the fines started rolling in, I couldn't ignore her anymore. The HOA had somehow figured out a way to charge me for every perceived slight, and now it had escalated to something. That couldn't be ignored. I couldn't let her dictate my life like this. My tractor sat there, innocent enough, a workhorse I relied on for upkeep, gathering dust in the early morning light. I turned toward the house, suddenly aware of how much the quiet had changed. What had once been a sleepy, idyllic street where kids played in the yard and neighbors waved as they passed had become a warzone, one where Karen's rules were law and any infraction was grounds for punishment. I knew Karen wasn't going to stop at a fine. No, she would escalate. She would find some way to make an example of me, and I wasn't going to make it easy for her. Later that afternoon, the HOA's official violation notice arrived in my mailbox. The document was stiff with bureaucracy, as though it had been printed by a machine with no heart. But the final blow came in the form of a small, bolded section that sent chills down my spine. Failure to comply within 72 hours will result in further action, including but not limited to legal proceedings and property damage claims. I shook my head. The audacity. The woman had gone from passive-aggressive notes to outright threats. But what could I do? She had the HOA on her side, and everyone else in the community seemed too afraid to challenge her. I'd seen the way people looked at her, with a mix of reverence and fear. It wasn't just her position, it was her demeanor. Karen had a way of making you feel like you were under her thumb at all times, even when you were miles away. She was everywhere, and she knew everything. Nothing escaped her notice. That night, as I lay awake, I heard the familiar hum of the wind in the trees outside, the faint rustle of leaves against the siding. But it wasn't enough to ease my mind. The tractor, the fines, the violation notice. It was too much. I couldn't just stand by and let her destroy everything. Something had to change. But how? I had to fight back. But how? She'd made it clear that I was just one small piece in her grand plan to turn this neighborhood into her personal fiefdom, a place where she could enforce her will without challenge. But for the first time, I was thinking like a fighter, not a victim. I needed to gather my strength, bide my time, and find a way to outsmart her. The next morning, as I walked out the door, the wind bit a little sharper than usual. I glanced down at the gravel driveway, wondering how long it would be before things escalated even further. The thought of Karen taking more from me, squeezing the life out of this community with her overreach, fueled the fire in my chest. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Across the street, just beyond my neighbor's house, I saw a flicker of movement, a shadow darting across the yard. Karen. She was standing on the other side of my fence, holding something in her hands. I couldn't see what, but her expression was as smug as ever. I walked toward her slowly, determined to confront this once and for all. But then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a match being struck. Before I could react, I saw a burst of orange light, then the crackling sound of fire spreading. Tractor. It was on fire. The sudden realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Karen had crossed the line, and there was no going back. As the flames climbed higher, I froze for a moment. Was this her final act of defiance? Had she finally lost control of her power trip? I couldn't stand there and watch my livelihood go up in smoke. My hand reached for my phone, but then I stopped myself. I had to think this through. This couldn't just be about putting out the fire. This was bigger than that now. Karen had made a fatal mistake, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. Not now. But what could I do? What was my next move? The fire raged on. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, watching the thick black smoke curl up into the early morning sky. The orange flickers danced hungrily around the steel frame of my tractor, crackling and popping as the flames took hold. I could feel the heat from where I stood, the air growing heavy with the scent of gasoline and burning rubber. My hands tightened around the phone in my grip, but for some reason I didn't call 911 right away. Instead, I looked across the street, my eyes locked on Karen. She stood there, a smug grin plastered across her face, watching my tractor burn. It was as if the fire was nothing more than a victory dance for her, a final stamp of her power, a way to say, "You can't touch me." I knew she was the one who did this. Who else? She'd been following me around for weeks, documenting every tiny infraction, every imperfection. But this was no small violation. She'd escalated things to a new, dangerous level. The fire wasn't just a violation of my property. It was a direct challenge, a warning, and I couldn't let it go unchallenged. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had to think. What do I do? I dialed 911, my fingers shaking as I pressed the numbers. I barely managed to spit out the details. My tractor's on fire, and I think someone set it on purpose. I need help right now. The dispatcher's voice was calm, asking for my address, and within seconds I could hear the sirens in the distance. But the question kept eating at me. Why would she do this? I knew Karen. She wasn't just some overzealous HOA president trying to enforce a few ridiculous rules. No, she was far worse. She was a woman consumed by a thirst for control, and she wouldn't stop until she had every inch of this neighborhood under her thumb. The tractor wasn't just an inconvenience to her. It was a symbol of everything she hated about people, like me. People who didn't bow to her self-appointed authority. By the time the fire trucks arrived, my tractor was nothing but a smoldering hulk of metal, a twisted shell of its former self. Firefighters rushed past me, their faces set in determination, but I was already moving toward Karen's house. I couldn't let this slide, not after everything she'd already done, and certainly not after what she'd just done to my livelihood. I crossed the street, walking with a slow, deliberate pace. She watched me from her front porch, her arms crossed over her chest, her face an unreadable mask. The fire trucks were busy at the scene, but I didn't care. All I cared about now was her. "What the hell is wrong with you, Karen?" I called out, my voice low but cutting. I was trying to keep my anger in check, but it was getting harder with every step. "Did you seriously just burn my property?" Her eyes narrowed, but the smirk never left her face. She leaned against the railing, looking like she was in total control. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, John," she said, her voice laced with that irritating, condescending tone. "Your tractor violated HOA rules, and I gave you plenty of chances to fix it. I'm just enforcing the law, as I'm entitled to do." "Don't play that game with me," I snapped, taking a step closer. "You think this is about a rule violation? This is personal. You burned my tractor, Karen. You crossed a line, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." Her eyes flickered with something that could have been irritation, but she didn't flinch. If you'd been more cooperative, maybe this wouldn't have happened. But you've ignored every warning I've given you, and now we're here. It's unfortunate, but it's the reality of living in a community that follows the rules. The hypocrisy in her words made my blood boil. This isn't about following the rules. This is about you getting off on having power over people. And you know what? I'm done with it. I turned on my heel, heading back toward the wreckage of my tractor. But as I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't finished. She was too smug, too sure of herself. I could see the wheels turning in her head, already thinking of her next move. But what could she possibly do next? Could things get worse than this? That night, after the fire was out and the smoke had cleared, I sat on my porch, staring into the darkness. The whole community was asleep, oblivious to what had just happened. I couldn't help but wonder if they even cared. After all, Karen had most of them wrapped around her finger. No one was going to stand up to her, not unless I made them. But how I had to outsmart her, outlast her. I knew I couldn't take her down directly. Not yet. She was too powerful, too entrenched. But there was something I could do. Something that could slowly unravel her control. The trick was finding it. I had to be patient. The next few days were a blur. I didn't sleep much, and the constant threat of Karen's next move hung over me like a storm cloud. She didn't back off, not even for a second. Instead, the fines piled up. First, for unapproved landscaping, then for unlicensed vehicle storage, then for unauthorized outdoor furniture placement. Each infraction was more absurd than the last, but it didn't matter. She had all the power in the world to enforce them. What was worse, Karen had begun to rally support in the community. She'd hosted a few neighborhood meetings, carefully positioning herself as the benevolent ruler, the one keeping everyone safe from the chaos of noncompliance. People ate it up. They were too afraid to question her, and some of them were even starting to look at me like I was the problem. But then, something happened. A small crack appeared in Karen's armor. I had been speaking to my neighbor Bill, the one who lived 2 doors down. He'd always been a quiet guy, but I could tell he wasn't as keen on Karen's rise to power as everyone else. Bill had just finished mowing his lawn when he casually mentioned something that made my heart skip a beat. "I heard she's got something in her past," Bill said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Something she's been hiding. You didn't hear it from me, but I don't know. It's like she's been covering her tracks for years." I narrowed my eyes, barely able to contain the surge of hope that shot through me. What did Bill— No! What was Karen hiding? Before I could ask more, Karen's voice rang out across the street, calling my name. "I thought you'd be smart enough to know when you've lost, John," she shouted, her voice carrying across the yard. "You'd better start packing. You're going to be hearing from my lawyer soon." I turned to face her, a knowing smile spreading across my face. She had no idea what she'd just set in motion. Bill's words echoed in my head as I walked back toward my house. What's she hiding? What was in her past that she'd worked so hard to keep buried? I wasn't going to let this go. I had a plan. Now. And Karen was about to find out that her grip on this community wasn't as secure as she thought. But there was something I needed first. I needed to know the truth. I wasn't going to stop until I had it. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the edge of something huge. Bill's words kept swirling in my head, that cryptic comment about Karen's past. Something she'd been hiding for years. If I could figure out what it was, I could finally have leverage. I didn't care how long it took. I was done being the target. If Karen wanted a war, she'd get one. But first, I needed to find out just how deep this woman's roots went. I spent the next few days gathering intel, combing through town records, talking to old neighbors, anyone who might have a story to tell. It wasn't easy. Karen was a master at covering her tracks. She had everyone fooled. I didn't even have a full name for her before she moved into the neighborhood, and any mention of her past was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. But I was persistent. The cracks were there. I just had to find them. By the end of the week, I got a break. A former neighbor, a woman named Linda, who had lived on Karen's old block before she moved here, had an interesting tidbit. "She wasn't always like this," Linda said, her voice low, almost as if she was afraid Karen would somehow hear. "When Karen first moved in, she was just a regular person, but after her divorce, she changed. Something about that made her different. Obsessed with control. Obsessed with being in charge of everything. I didn't think much of it at the time, but then things started getting strange." I leaned in, heart racing. "Strange how?" Linda hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if the walls themselves had ears. "Well, she started getting involved in local politics. First it was the PTA, then the school board. Then, before I knew it, she was all over the place, getting into everyone's business. People said she was, I don't know, manipulating things behind the scenes. She was never content with just being a part of things. She had to be in control. And when she got into the HOA here, that's when it all changed." I leaned back, digesting what Linda had said. A divorce, politics, manipulation. This wasn't just about property management anymore. This was personal. There had to be more to Karen than I had realized, something that drove her to seek this kind of power. But what was it? What had happened during her marriage or after that turned her into this monster? That night, I went back to my house and spent hours going through Karen's old social media accounts, any public records I could dig up, even her ex-husband's online presence. Nothing gave me a smoking gun, but there was a sense of unease growing in me as I pieced things together. Karen had been a part of every small community she'd ever lived in, using charm, fear, and manipulation to climb higher. And now, she'd set her sights on ours. I was starting to understand her playbook, but I wasn't ready to make my move just yet. There was still too much unknown. I needed more. The next morning, I was jolted awake by the sound of a knock at my door. A delivery man stood on my front porch holding an envelope. It was thick, sealed with a large, official-looking HOA logo. I hesitated for a moment before I took it from him, tearing it open with shaky hands. Inside was a formal letter from the HOA's legal department. They were demanding payment for the fines I'd accumulated, including the fire damage fee for the tractor I'd lost, fines that had nearly doubled in the last 2 weeks. My heart raced as I skimmed through the legal jargon, but one line stood out. Failure to comply with these fines will result in immediate legal action and further punitive measures. I could feel my blood boiling. The nerve of her, after everything she'd done, after burning my property. Now she was demanding more money. But there was something else in the letter that made my stomach drop. A section at the bottom, marked with a red stamp, read, "Failure to pay fines within 72 hours will result in a lien being placed on your property." I clenched the letter in my hand, the paper crumpling under the pressure. She was trying to break me, to take everything I had. But she wasn't the only one with a weapon at her disposal. I had to get to the bottom of this. It was time to confront Karen, to expose her lies. I wasn't going to let her pull this crap anymore. The next day, I arrived at her house determined to make her face the truth. As I walked up the driveway, I saw her standing at the door, arms crossed, a smug smile playing on her lips. "You don't give up, do you?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I stepped closer, holding up the letter. "You're not going to get away with this. You've already burned my property, and now you're trying to take my house?" She stepped back, her eyes narrowing. "You're just upset because you can't follow the rules, John. This is what happens when people like you don't respect the community." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "No, Karen. This is what happens when people like you abuse their power. You're not in charge of me. You're not in charge of this neighborhood, and I'm done letting you push everyone around." She smiled again, but this time, it wasn't smug. It was calculating. "I don't think you fully understand the situation, John. You're in over your head. But don't worry. I'll give you a chance to make things right. You can pay the fines. You can apologize for your defiance, and maybe, just maybe, we can put all of this behind us." I shook my head. "You're wrong, Karen. This isn't over." She stepped closer, her eyes boring into mine. "You think you can win? Do you really think you have what it takes to take me down? You have no idea what I've already set in motion. No idea what's coming for you." I could feel the threat in her words, but for the first time I wasn't afraid. I had a plan, and I wasn't going to let her scare me. I'd been patient long enough, but just as I was about to turn and walk away, Karen dropped a bombshell. "I know what you've been doing, John," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I know about your little investigation, about the things you've been digging up. And let me tell you something. You don't want to go down that road. If you keep poking around, you'll find something you'll wish you hadn't." My stomach twisted. What did she mean? What had she found? Before I could respond, she turned and walked inside, leaving me standing there, heart pounding. I wasn't ready for this. She knew what I was up to. She was one step ahead, but then it hit me. What if she knew everything? What if I had been walking straight into her trap the entire time? I had to find out. I wasn't going to stop now. But the stakes had just gone through the roof. I had no idea how far Karen was willing to go to protect her secrets, but I was about to find out. I spent the next few days stewing over Karen's words. That cryptic warning about the things I'd been digging up haunted me. What did she know? What could she possibly have on me? I had no idea, but one thing was clear. I couldn't back down now. Whatever it was, whatever her power play was, I was ready to take her down. I turned over every lead, every thread I'd pulled on since this nightmare started. And then, something clicked. Bill's offhand remark about Karen's past, the hint of something buried there, combined with the warning she'd given me about poking around. It was all connected. I had to go back to Linda. I had to press her harder. By the time I made it to Linda's house, I could feel the pressure building, the clock ticking down toward whatever confrontation was coming. I knocked at her door and waited. Linda opened. It a crack, her eyes darting over my shoulder like she was afraid someone might be watching. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Linda looked around nervously before she stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her. "I didn't want to get involved, John, but you're getting too close to something you're not going to like." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She sighed, glancing up the street toward Karen's house, then back to me. "Karen's ex-husband, the one who left her? There's more to that story. She was involved in a scandal, a major one. It got covered up, but some people in town still talk about it." "Scandal?" I repeated. "What kind of scandal?" Linda hesitated, again clearly torn. "She was involved in something illegal. People think she used her connections in the local government to get out of it. She's been using this neighborhood, using her HOA power to keep people quiet, to make sure no one digs into her past. If you start poking around too much, you might uncover something that'll destroy her, and that's something she'll stop at nothing to protect." My blood ran cold. It was bigger than I'd thought. Karen's entire persona, everything she'd worked for, was a house of cards held up by her secrets. And if I could bring those secrets to light, I'd have everything I needed to take her down. That night, I made my move. I didn't sleep. I pulled up old news articles, scanned through court records, and combed through anything I could find on Karen's past. And there it was, buried deep in the local archives, a report on a real estate scandal linked to her ex-husband. The details were vague, but the connection was undeniable. Karen had used her influence to cover up a massive embezzlement scheme that involved several high-profile local figures. I sat there for hours, letting the weight of what I had discovered sink in. This was it. This was the secret she'd been desperately trying to keep hidden, and I was going to use it to destroy her. The next morning I showed up at the HOA meeting. I was ready for war. The usual crowd had gathered, and Karen was presiding over the meeting with her typical air of superiority. But this time, I wasn't going to sit back and let her dictate the terms. I had something she couldn't ignore. As Karen began speaking, her voice loud and confident, I stood up, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Actually, Karen," I said, my voice ringing clear in the silent room, "I think it's time you answered some questions about your past, about the scandal you've been hiding." The room went dead silent. Everyone turned to look at me, and I could see the realization dawning on Karen's face. She'd never expected me to go this far. She looked at me with an expression that could only be described as pure venom. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, trying to regain control of the room. I didn't back down. "You think you've been untouchable, don't you? But I've got news for you. Your past isn't as clean as you've led everyone to believe. I know about the embezzlement scandal. I know about how you used your influence to cover it up, and I'm going to make sure everyone else knows too." Her face drained of color. For a brief moment, I saw panic flicker in her eyes, an emotion she'd always been so careful to hide. The facade was cracking. "Don't do this, John," she spat, her voice low and dangerous. "You have no idea what you're messing with. You'll regret this." But I wasn't afraid anymore. "No, Karen, you will regret this. I had the documents, the proof, everything I needed to expose her for the fraud she was." I held up the file, and the eyes of the room followed it. "I'm not the one breaking the rules here. You are. You've been using this neighborhood to mask your own dirty secrets for far too long, and I'm done letting you do it." Karen's eyes flicked, from me to the papers, and for the first time I saw the cracks in her armor. She stood up quickly, knocking over her chair, her voice rising in anger. "This is my community. You have no right to—" "I have every right," I interrupted, my voice steady, "because this is all of ours, and you've been abusing your power for too long." For a long moment no one moved, the weight of the situation hanging heavy in the air. Then, slowly, people began to stand, their murmurs growing louder. I could feel the shift. Karen's grip on the community was loosening. Her eyes were wild now, her breath coming in short gasps as she scrambled to regain control. But she was out of options. She knew it. We all knew it. Finally, she backed down. "Fine, you've won, but don't think this is over." She stormed out of the room, her power unraveling with every step. I felt a sense of triumph, but it wasn't over yet. The community had seen who Karen truly was, and now there was no going back for her. Weeks passed. Karen disappeared from the neighborhood, her once ironclad hold on the HOA shattered. The fines stopped, the arbitrary rules vanished, and the community slowly began to return to normal. People spoke to each other again, as neighbors rather than subjects under Karen's reign. The final blow came when the local newspaper ran an expose on Karen's past. Her involvement in the embezzlement scheme came to light, and with it, the facade she'd built around herself crumbled completely. But the true irony came a few months later when I found myself at a town hall meeting. This time, I wasn't facing down a tyrant. I was there with my neighbors, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were all on the same side. Karen never returned to the neighborhood. Her name faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors. As I walked down my driveway one afternoon, the sun sinking low in the sky, I felt the weight of the last few months lifting from my shoulders. The tractor was gone, the fines had stopped, and peace had returned. Real peace, not the kind Karen had tried to force on us. But the most satisfying part was knowing that, in the end, it wasn't just the community that had changed. It was Karen, who had learned a hard lesson. No one is untouchable forever.